Okay, I think we should start. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Saule Chalbasova. I work at the University of Central Asia. And today you are joining here the session 1.5 on gender equality in civic engagement, rural work, and land access. We will have 3 presenters today, all from the University of Central Asia. And we will start with Marzhan Aikimbaeva, Associate Director of Education at the University of Central Asia. She will talk about exploring gender disparities in civic life, evidence from Kyrgyzstan. Also, welcome to our online participants. In case if you have questions, so I think after each presentation, we'll have 5 to 10 minutes for your questions. Okay, so Marzhan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll start by saying that this paper was developed back in 2021, I believe, as part of the Advancing Gender Equality Through Civil Society project. And it's a little bit weird to present it in 2025, but I think it's really important to talk about the importance of civic engagement, especially since we heard earlier today that in the 2025 cycle, some sensitive data portions were reduced or removed when it comes to politics and so on. So my aim today is not to, of course, interpret current politics, but to share what the previous cycles of the data showed at that particular point in time, and to reflect on how the upcoming LiK new data cycle might reveal what's changed since then, because it would be really interesting to see the dynamics when it comes to civic engagement from 2013 to 2019. Oops. Yeah. Okay. So as everyone knows, hopefully, civic participation patterns have been shaped by historical and social legacies in Kyrgyzstan and in wider Central Asia. In the past, participation was highly structured and state-driven, but the LiK survey allows us to look empirically at how these patterns evolved after decades that followed independence, particularly through a gender lens. So this gives us a very important baseline for understanding civic life in Kyrgyzstan before exploring how these experiences differ between men and women. So, okay. Sorry. So the study had 3 main goals. The first one was to examine whether there were actually gender differences in participation in civic life. In other words, to find out who participates, where, and how. Second, I wanted to understand how social and cultural factors influenced civic participation in communities. And third, to identify areas for deeper exploration once the next LiK dataset becomes available. Because as I said, there is a difference of 6 years, and when it comes to politics and civic engagement, a lot has changed since then. So with that in mind, I'm going to briefly explain how I approached the data. Okay, so I drew on 3 waves of the LiK surveys, so in 2013, 16, and 2019. As you know, the data set covers around 3,000 households and about 8,000 individuals. It's a nationally representative survey across different regions of Kyrgyzstan. And I focused on 3 key dimensions. So the first one being group membership, second one being civic engagement, and political participation, controlling for factors such as age, education, income, relationship status. And before I turn into the numbers, I think it's useful to clarify what civic engagement means in a LiK survey. So civic engagement in the survey itself is understood very broadly. It includes both formal and informal ways people contribute to public life in their communities. So it covers group membership, community, professional, or cultural associations, as well as things like volunteering or donating money to people in need or contributing to public projects and so on. But it also includes more political forms such as campaigning or protesting, as well as voting. So this broad definition is important because in Kyrgyzstan, much civic activity happens through informal community-based channels rather than formal organizations. Okay. Right. So here's what overall civic participation look like in Kyrgyzstan. Sorry, I'm skipping to the civic engagement by gender. So when we disaggregate by gender, interesting differences appear. So men were slightly more likely to engage in formal or public-facing activities. That includes political events or being engaged in political parties, fundraising, as well as community projects. While women were more involved in community-oriented or informal support networks. Overall participation was low for both groups, but what differed was the type of community engagement. So rather than saying one group is more engaged in a particular activity, we can say that they participate differently through different distinct social pathways. As we know, women often have less discretionary time and mobility because of unpaid care work, which I'm really interested in seeing what the 2025 survey will show. And also women have household responsibilities, and that naturally shapes when and how they can participate within their own communities, making kind of flexible, local, community-based engagement more accessible. And I think it also shows that the political and public institutions back in 2019 and probably now are currently male-dominated spaces. Additionally, as we know, women's community involvement often builds on trust-based mutual support systems. So as I will show in the next slides, they do take part in neighborhood projects, saving circles, shirine, informal credit unions, and so on. So even though these activities may not be labeled political, they are important civic mechanisms. Looking at group membership, these differences become clearer, as I just mentioned. Women are more active in community-based networks, such as shirine groups, credit unions, and local festival associations, while men appear more in political parties, professional associations, and sports groups. So again, the contrast is not about the quantity, but the form of civic engagement, so community versus public-facing spaces. And many of these women's networks serve as vital entry points to civic life, strengthening local trust and cooperation within their communities. So to analyze these patterns, I used a pooled data set combining the three waves of LiK survey. The panel was unbalanced because not all respondents appear in each wave, but it offered a strong national coverage. So the main outcome variable was membership in civic, political, or community associations. I also explored volunteering and donations and examined how income, age, education, and relationship status can affect participation. So the analysis is descriptive rather than casual, but it provides a robust snapshot of engagement across groups. So even after accounting for demographic factors, we see that the gender segmentation still persists. Women are more likely to participate in community-based or financial cooperative structures such as shirine or the credit unions. Men are more active in political parties, spiritual or religious organizations, and sports groups. Education and income both increase the likelihood of participation, and older respondents tend to be more active. So gender differences remain substantial, but they intersect with broader social and economic influences. Looking more closely at specific type of activities, men are somewhat more active when it comes to donating to the poor, fundraising, and political participation. Voting and computer use both strongly predict civic engagement regardless of gender. So digital and political access do matter in this case. Altogether, engagement appears shaped not only by gender in this case, but by also opportunity, meaning access to information, mobility, and social capital. So the findings align with earlier research across the region, but globally as well, showing the gender-based differences in civic participation. Social expectations still influence how people engage. Men are engaged more in formal public arenas, while women choose local and community-centered initiatives. Importantly, these are different forms of engagements, not the lesser ones. So that should not be, I guess, the result of this analysis. Everyone contributes to civic life in its own way, through public leadership or through building everyday resilience and cooperation at the community level. But why should women participate more civically? Women's involvement in community groups often strengthens the social capital as well as local problem solving. These networks can expand representation and voice in decision-making, even outside formal political structures. So while overall participation rates may differ, the qualitative impact of women's engagement is significant, and it sustains trust, cohesion, and everyday governance at the local level. So looking ahead, encouraging broader and more inclusive civic participation would mean recognizing these diverse forms of engagement. Supporting community-based initiatives can make participation more accessible, particularly for women that are balancing multiple roles, both in private and public spaces. It's important to address structural barriers, for example, unpaid care work, unequal access to resources, and hopefully the next rounds of the LiK data, the 2025 version, will give us a chance to see how there is like this dynamic evolution from 2013, which I'm really excited about. So in that sense, this study was snapshots, but hopefully the next wave will help us to complete the picture, especially given the events and changes that have happened in the last years when it comes to politics and civic engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marzhan. It was very insightful presentation. If anybody have any questions, please raise your hand. Or anybody online have a question, please unmute yourself. Yeah, Martin, do we have a mic? You finished just on time.
Thank you so much. Yes, works. Martin Pietrik, used to Civic University Gießen, Germany. Thanks so much for this excellent presentation. I think it stood really out in terms of how professionally it was presented, how clearly understandable your messages were, and how nicely and intuitively designed the slides also were. So that was really easy to follow. At the same time, I was asking me also what comes next or what to take away from it. I mean, your study seemed to be fairly explorative. And you, especially when it comes to the findings part, you said relatively little about where's the problem. Yeah, I mean, so when you find that the patterns of civic engagement of men and women differ significantly, as it seems, right? So is it good or bad? Should we be worried about it or not? I think you could go more in that direction. And I also have a methodological point. Is there a reason you did not exploit the panel data character, the panel data nature of your data, right? Which would have allowed you to perhaps even model things like fixed effects in panels or so, right? Which the LiK allows in principle. So you used pooled data, right? What was the reason for that?
Yes, to answer the first question, I think with this study, I wanted to see, because the data was available, whether there were in fact gender differences first. And then, of course, that means that women are not participating in the spaces that we assume they would. And the second paper, or I guess the extension of this paper that it would incorporate the 2025 wave, would address the questions, okay, here's a complete picture of what happened in the last 12 years, let's say. These are the dynamics and where we should take it from. Regarding your panel data, I do take it into consideration. For the next iteration of the paper, I will explore fixed effects or random effects and do it more in detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions online? All right, so let's move to the next presentation by Zalina Enikeeva from the University of Central Asia. She will talk about the woman portrait for the last 35 years, women in Kyrgyzstan. So I'm really looking forward to this one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Saule, for the introduction. And it was really, I'm very excited with the telling you what changes what changes in economic and social sphere did women in Kyrgyzstan experience since 1991. And this presentation is based on the findings from the Advancing Gender Equality Through Civil Society project, and it's a component of the Foundations for Health and Empowerment program, an initiative of the Aga Foundation Canada with the financial support from the government of Canada. And before starting to talk what has happened with women after the Soviet period, let's make a brief jump to the Soviet history. What did women in Soviet time in Kyrgyzstan experienced? So, as in all post-Soviet republics, the evolving position of women in society results from a complex mix of Soviet legacy, economic transformation, and persistent social norms. Laws were introduced to ensure women's equality with men in all areas of life. The minimum marriage age for girls was raised to 16, up from 9 years as it was to Sharia law, and polygamy and forced marriages were banned. Women gained access to divorce and registered marriages, replaced religious ones. Women's departments, promoted modernization through literacy schools, kindergartens, and family support services. State subsidies expanded access to healthcare, childcare, housing, and social benefits. Women entered the workforce in large numbers with quotas, ensuring their presence in leadership and roles. As you can see, in 1990, right before the Soviet Union collapse, 83% of female labor force were officially employed in the Kyrgyz Soviet Republic. While Kyrgyz women were encouraged to enter the workforce, they were also expected to remain dedicated to the domestic sphere, responsible for household chores and childcare. In Central Asia, this was more burdensome, even given the prevalence of larger families. Motherhood was seen at the one of the main things of the female achievement and stick against which success would be measured. Analysis of Soviet-era magazines, such as Kyrgyzstana Yaldary, shows that a happy motherhood was defined by the number of children she has. The greater, the happier. And the total fertility rate peaked in the 1970s when there were 5 births per woman. As all of you know, after Soviet Union collapse, all countries had significant degrees of social and economic indicators, and Kyrgyzstan is not the exception. Public well-being and official figures show that nearly 10% of children were chronically hungry. And the closure of nearly 2/3 of public kindergartens deprived many economically active women of key child welfare support that enabled them to work outside the home. And during the first decade of 90s, the decline in population due to migration loss comprised around 9% of population, with 60% leaving for Russia and 15% leaving the newly formed CIS countries. After the Union collapse and experiencing hard financial times, women of the Kyrgyz Republic started giving birth less, as given on the graph you can see. And traditionally, urban rate fertility rate is significantly less than in rural areas, as in cities, women, they are more eager to get education, to work, and pursue their career growth, and this delays the birth of the first child, while the rural areas, they are more traditional in this question. Oh. Okay, and here on the graph you can see the trend that was in female employment by sectors, and for example, in 1991, almost 20% of men were employed in the industrial sector, but this declined to, okay, this is for the female. And you can see that in 1991, the distribution of sectors for female employment was almost equal in industrial sector, agriculture, and service. But by the end of the 19th years, the growth to employment of women in agriculture was significant, while in industry declined significantly as well. And in the early 90s, a dramatic trade expansion occurred. By 1996, the number of people involved in trade activities had doubled, and Kyrgyzstan's entry to the World Trade Organization in 1991 being the first former Soviet country to join WTO, as well as the formative liberal trade regime, ensured minimal tariffs on Chinese imports, as China then joined to WTO in 2021. It enabled not only to import Chinese commodities, but facilitated re-export to neighboring countries, and this in turn led to the massive development of two bazaars, Dardoi and Karasu. According to early rough estimations, 57% of sellers in Dardoi and 50% of sellers in Karasu were women. In the late 19th, the sewing industry became another source of the Kyrgyz industrial sector growth, and the majority of employed in the informal garment sector were women. And the so-called shuttle traders, or chelnaki, who came to Kyrgyzstan from the neighboring countries, mainly from Kazakhstan and Russia, were mostly women as well. Being involved in the informal trade, shuttle trade, women were under the risk of being exposed to any kind of violation or robbery at the border crossing points or on the road. At the same time, this form of activity allowed them to earn money, very often being the only breadwinner in the family, and it might be assumed as a female empowerment. However, according to some studies, many women who were involved in this kind of activity, working in the trade industry, they perceived as a decline in their social status. In memory of those difficulties that Chelnaki experienced, the shuttle traders monument was installed at the entrance of Dordoi market in 2018. And the composition includes monument of a man and two women with the checkered bags, which became the symbol of the shuttle trade in 19th. And Dordoi's president, Salombekov, he noted that thanks to female shuttle traders, the economy of Kyrgyzstan was out of collapse in the 90s. In the next decade, life of population becomes easier with some downfalls in 2005 and 2010, with the country experienced 2 revolutions. And involvement of women in agriculture, as you can see, being the highest in 2000, it started to decline. And in 2009, it reached 32%. While the employment in the services sector, it grew significantly. Along with the growth of the fertility rate, as you can see on the graph, the country experienced the rise of the maternity and infant mortality during the decade. And according to the WHO, the levels of maternal, infant, and child mortality are the most sensitive indicators in assessing both the quality of medical services provided and the socioeconomic level of development of the country. So, almost 80% of maternal deaths, they occurred in rural areas, and the official authorities linked the rise in infant mortality since 2004 to Kyrgyzstan's adoption of World Health Organization criteria for live birth, which includes registering the deaths of infants with low birth weight. So according to it was explained by the changes in the statistical methodology. Regarding the infant mortality, but maternity, high maternity death was explained by the really poor medical conventions at that time, and as well, since 2000, the migration outflow took another shape. If earlier people were leaving Kyrgyzstan for permanent residential, then these times people moved for labor migration, and that caused the unemployment and poverty rate reduction. So, according to some estimations, the money received it cost that labor migration was so large that it exceeded foreign investments in the middle of 2000. Almost 40% of Kyrgyz migrants in the Russian Federation were women in 2019, and migrant women work primarily in the service sector, catering, textile, and in the domestic workers. The majority of them work in the informal employment sector for more than 10 hours a day and have limited access to social protection services. And according to a survey of female migration from all members of the Commonwealth of Independent States to the Russian Federation, women from Central Asia were found to be the most vulnerable group. They endured the worst living conditions and faced major problems in terms of gaining access to medical services. But at the same time, they sent the largest portion of their salaries as remittances. And throughout this period of political turmoil and uncertainty, there has been a resurgence of traditional practices, like not traditional, and revived practices have tended to increase men's power, petitioning women at their property, the paying of kalim, the remarrying of a widow to her dead husband's next of kin, and then bride kidnapping, polygyny, and when the potential legislation of which continues to be subject to debate till these times. And UNICEF report from 2005 stated that Kyrgyzstan was found to have the highest rates of child marriages among all the former Soviet states. Overall, reports of violence against women and girls increased during this time period, including female slavery, prostitution, trafficking, rape, murder, bride kidnapping, and domestic violence. Moving to the pre-COVID era, it was marked by the growth of informal economy. It composed around 24% of country's GDP, and around 72% of labor market was employed in the informal sector. And the main sectors representing informality were trade and services, construction, processing industry, and trade and logistics. Female labor force continued to shrink during this period, with reaching its minimum point at 42%. And at the same time, the steady prevalence of female employment in services comparing to agriculture industry has established, and it achieved 67% versus almost 20% in agriculture. Okay, maybe I'm moving fast. So as you can see from the graph, the ratio of women's wages in relation to men is almost stable. So it means that women receive 75% of salary that men receives for the same work that they both done. And unfortunately, this gap is still here. At the same time, we can see that the fertility rate was higher in urban area than in rural area, which is like phenomenon for most countries during that period, and it's most probably explained by the high internal migration from rural areas to urban areas. And as well, you can see that the share of women of reproductive age using contraceptives, it fell significantly to 17% in 2020. And the proportion of births with an interpregnancy interval of less than 2 years was more than 32%. And as well, pre-COVID era was marked by the growth of digitalization and the digital tools that boomed during COVID, during pandemic. But before that, already those works that that needed only access to internet and computer switched many women to their offline type of activities to the online mode. And at that era, such works as social media marketing, influencers, copywriters appeared. And the COVID era, as you know, all the problems that we had at that time, and the gender-based violence, household chores burden, online schooling, all these things were main challenges that women in Kyrgyzstan experienced. At the same time, I would like to pay attention to the fertility rate graph. It looks like the fish now, and as you can see, the phenomenon of the higher urban fertility rate is now decreasing, and in 2023 it was like the normal, like not normal, but which is usually should happen usually happens in other countries. And as well, I just wanted to briefly describe what has happened in Narin region, because it was okay. Yeah. So in the Narin region, you can see that fertility rate in some years was higher than the general in the Kyrgyz Republic. But at the same time, Narin region still experiences a high maternal mortality, and in comparison with the other region. And but at the same time, women in Narin region, they this is the only region almost where women, they participate equally in terms of agricultural activities or in terms of livestock management, when they do the same work as men do. And usually they participate in those livestock and grazing on pastures and making dried dairy products, but at the same time they are excluded from the participation in terms of selling them and getting money like usually men receive for the same type of work that they do. And okay, because we are lack of time, so the last 5 years have witnessed enormous changes in Kyrgyzstan, which have impacted massively on women's lives. Perception of good women in Kyrgyzstan revolve primarily around the role of wife and mother. Despite the decline of women's participation in the workforce, the active participation in the Badar and chattel trade of the 90s and migrant work in 20s shown their important contribution to the Kyrgyz economy. So,
Thank you very much, Zalina. I think it was very interesting presentations. For myself, I just noted 3 things. The first is the importance of women labor in trade, historically for Kyrgyzstan, starting from 1990s. The second is the belief in the late Soviet times, the more kids, the better. I think it overlaps with the current strategy of our government. And the third one is the employment trends that you showed about female. I think like if we saw on the graph also male, I think it would be similar because maybe of the shifts in the, yeah. But if anyone have any questions, please raise your hand. Yes.
I would like to say you about kindergarten for babies, for our babies, because after reduce of kindergartens in the regions and cities, our workforce from women reduced it to, and I suggest you include these indicators in your research, and you can see maybe you can see, maybe we can see new interpretation of our data. And also, as I say before, for example, from 21 to 24, in 3 years, we update our indicators of what coverage of by the kindergartens from 24 to the 44 in 3 years. It is excellent indicators, I think. And to the 2030, we would like update our indicators to the 80, from 44 to the 80. And you can include these moments too in your research. It is my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, kindergarten shortage is one of the explanations of the fall in female work participation in the labor market. Thank you. And because I have very limited time, that's why I didn't cover it very much. But yes, this is one of the explanations of the low female participation.
Yes.
I feel pressed to give a short comment at least on the conclusions that you showed on the last slides concerning the central narratives on the role of women in Kyrgyzstan. I think this panel in front of us here shows that it clearly goes beyond the role of wife and mother for young women sitting in front of us doing research, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But we try to manage all the roles.
If no other questions, let's go to the third presentations. We have a bit less time, 15 minutes. Third presentations will be by Nagima Shukurbekova from University of Central Asia. She will talk about the rural youth perspectives on land ownership and decision-making power. So I think it will be also interesting to listen.
Thank you, Saule. Today, I will be presenting a preliminary draft version of my study on gender gap in land, in access to land and decision-making power in Central Asian countries. In my presentation, I will be addressing the following topics. So the importance of the subject, the research questions, theoretical framework of the study, the study design, and the regional policy context, and the key findings from data. So why this topic is significant to study is because, as we all know, the majority of population in our region, they live in rural areas and they work in agricultural sector, and accordingly, land is their main source of income. And because of this, access to land for rural people is very important for better livelihoods, for higher productivity. But access to land is not only about owning a piece of soil. The true empowerment to invest, to develop comes not just from holding land, but from the right and the freedom to decide how to use it and how to benefit from it. So this means that young people in rural areas, they face two main issues in this aspect. The first is the gender and I can say generation gap in land ownership. And I want to mention here that by ownership, I mean like access to land, because as we know, in many countries, land is given like for rent. And the second issue that young people in rural areas face is that a limited decision-making power over how their land or property can be used. And also in Central Asia, family traditions and inheritance customs often make it difficult to young people, especially young women, control their property, their land, even when they work on it. And also, there is still limited research on how rural youth, especially young women, gain access to land and decision-making power. Also, there's a few studies how family living arrangements, such as living with parents, as we know, this is a very common thing in our cultures, affect young people's autonomy in making land or property-related decisions. So based on these research gaps, I decided to explore how gender, household structures, and employment sector shape rural youth land ownership and decision-making power in Central Asia. And these questions are guided by two theoretical approaches, which are property right theory and the household bargaining model. The first one, property right theory, explains that a secure ownership of land increases people's willingness to invest, to improve productivity, and plan for the long term, which enhances sustainability. And this theory also helps us understand how legal and social recognition of land rights shapes economic opportunities for young people. And the second model is the household bargaining model. It shows that decision-making power within a family depends on each person's access to resources such as income, land, or other property assets. And it also helps us understand that when youth and women have some control over land or income, they have a stronger position in household decisions. For this study, I used phone survey conducted by FAO together with the UCA last year in 4 Central Asian countries: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. 4,000 young people across these countries participated in the survey, 1,000 respondents per country, and male and female, they were represented in this survey equally. The original study, conducted by FAO and UCA, used a mixed method approach. They conducted after phone survey, desk study, in-depth interviews and focus groups. But for this study, I used only phone survey, which I was also engaged in data cleaning and processing last year. And for the analysis, I used descriptive statistics and gender disaggregated analysis to show differences between young men and women. So all 4 countries have national land laws and have been working on land reforms and land registration improvements in recent years. They also developed use strategies, laws that emphasize employment, entrepreneurship, and skills for young people. They also in gender areas, they also have national strategies or laws, how to empower women and how to improve women's rights and their participation. So accordingly, legal frameworks in all these countries exist, but data shows that practical application remains limited. And before I move to addressing my research questions, I thought it would be interesting to look at the perceptions of young people into to 2 questions in the survey. The first, it was asked whether they agree or disagree with the statement that there are unequal, different opportunities for male and female. And as you can see from the graph, the majority of young people, they agree that there is an inequality in opportunities, but the important thing is whether they want to change it, whether they want to change the situation. And in the second question, they were asked whether young people, whether they are aware about gender gaps and in society, and whether they think that it is normal and no change is needed, or it is not normal and change should happen. And in this graph, so it was the second question. So whether young people in rural areas think that gender gap is normal and no change is needed, or abnormal and change should happen. And as you can see here, majority of female respondents are significantly more likely to view gender inequality as abnormal, as they want the change happened. And young men, unfortunately, are more inclined towards maintaining these, I don't know, is it proper to say traditional norms? Okay, so I am moving to the research questions, and here we can look at the share of land access among rural youth by each country. And as you can see, the share of young people who own land and livestock is very limited, which already suggests that many young people in rural areas are not actively engaged in agricultural activities or agri-food system. Here, in the first graph, it is given employment sector by country, and in the second graph, employment sector by gender. So from the first chart, we can see that the share of those unemployed is quite high, especially in Uzbekistan, where more than 3/4 of respondents reported that they are unemployed. In other countries, unemployment rates range between 40 to 47. Employment in agriculture remains very low. Only 244 respondents out of 4,000 reported they are working in agricultural sector, and out of this number, only 30 are female. So 214 reported that they work in agricultural sector. And looking at gender differences, we can say that only like less than half of female are employed, like 64% of young women in the region do not work. And also in the second graph, it is important to note that the female size is very low. So here we are not comparing male and female. We are just, I try just to show how many percentage of women are working in agricultural sector. And in the, so here the purpose is to show whether land access is linked to working in agricultural sector or not. And I want to highlight that the female size is very low. Only 155 respondents reported that they own land. And out of this number, only 47 are women. So from the chart, we can see that land ownership is not strongly linked to agricultural sector. And among those working in agriculture, only about 24% of men and 4% of women own land. Now I'm moving to this second research question. It's the relationship between household structure and decision-making power. In this slide, we look at the decision-making power over possessed property among rural youth. As you can see from the graph, in most countries, men are more likely to decide independently how to use their property, and women tend to more consult with their spouse, with their parents, or with other family members. So this suggests that rural households remain quite conservative, where like older members of family or like men typically hold like decision-making power in property-related decisions. Okay. So also here you can see that more than 60% of rural young women are married, and when it comes to living arrangements, the majority of both men and females, they live in rural areas, they live with their parents. And I tried to run like simple regression whether living with parents affects on decision-making power. So here are like two simple linear regression lines that show that living with parents has a strong and significant negative effect on young people's decision-making autonomy. So in other words, those who live with parents are less likely to decide independently how to use like own property or income, and but gender and marital status, on the other hand, are not statistically significant as like with living with parents. So to conclude, most young people recognize that gender inequality exists, and young women, they are like more likely to say that change is needed, and land ownership among rural youth remains very low, and only a small share of land owners are women. When it comes to household decision-making, men are generally more likely to decide independently about property, and while women tend to consult with family members. And regression also showed that those living with parents tend to have lower decision-making power. So based on these findings, I think that policies should aim to make land rights and related services more youth and women like gender friendly, and support young people's livelihoods, address household barriers that limit autonomy, and continue improving data and evidence on rural youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nagima. I think this was also one of the main topics, very important topics of land use and land ownership, especially in Central Asian countries. So if anyone have any questions, please raise your hands, also online participants. Yeah, it can be either questions to Nagima or to other presenters.
Hello, thank you so much for your great presentations. I have a question to Nagima, to the last presentation. Just question for clarification, because one of the clear findings was that the decision-making depends on whether you live with parents or not, and not necessarily depends on your spouse. Did you take into account, or were the respondents, among the respondents, those who were married and still living with parents? Was that the case? Or did you ask the people who were living separately as a couple, like married couple, and those who were just not married but still living with parents? So just for clarification.
So, in the survey, the question was whether they live with parents or not. And the survey didn't take into account whether you are living with your parents, with your spouse or not. So it was a general question. Yeah. So here it might be that, like, especially for women, so when they are answering, might be that they don't live with their parents, but with his parents, yes.
Thanks, Nagima, for this wonderful presentation, also very clearly structured. I especially appreciated that you had some detailed slides, not only on the methods and data, but even on the theoretical framework also. I think, I'm not sure whether your findings, you did not reconnect them to the theoretical framework in the end, but you actually could, I think, yeah. It was pretty clear, I think, that you talked about the potential effects of ownership, right? So property rights theory, but also the household bargaining theory. You didn't mention it in the end, but you could actually, because several of I think your empirical insights more or less directly relate to the questions of who has to say what in the households, right? Including the question we just had. However, on one or two slides, I was really a bit struggling in getting the message from your presentation. Unfortunately, I also couldn't always see the slide numbers very well. So I guess it was around slide 12 or so. Can you show that again? It was one of your bar diagrams. Is it possible to go back?
Пожалуйста, презентацию поставьте на экран.
Can you go to 12? One more? No, that's not the one. Can you go back? Yes, no, in the other direction. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think the numbers are not consecutive, right? To the back. Further to the back. I'm sorry. One more. One more. One more. This was a regression? No, I can't find it right now. I'm sorry. There were bar diagrams in the middle somewhere. Okay, we can talk about that later. I think stop here. So, for example, to make this more compact, you could avoid half of the bars by eliminating the redundant information, right? So the first two pairs of bars, they have the same information, correct? Because it's all, the one is the difference to 100% from the other. right? Disagree is the inverse of agree. You could make the bar diagram much simpler by eliminating half of the bars, and you would still have the same information on the slide, right?
You mean like make this graph not only by country or also by gender? Or...
So by country is fine, but you don't need the separate agree and disagree bars because they contain the same information. One is the other minus 100%, right? Well, maybe you share the slides. I can find this other slide later on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you a lot for the presentation. I have a quick question to the last presenter as well. You've mentioned that the youth-friendly and gender-friendly registration procedures are needed. Can you elaborate more on that? What do you mean by simpler rules, and how do you imagine it to look like? Thank you.
So when I was exploring like policy context for each country, I noticed that in some countries, like in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, when they are like doing a land registration, there is a specific rule to register the land for the like head of the household. And it means that maybe it would be better to develop maybe other opportunities, like other options to give access to land for like younger members of the household as well.
They don't individualize.
Yes, especially in Tajikistan, it is still like they are like registering to the like head of the household. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next question.
Yeah, my name is Nazgul. I'm from UCA. I have a question regarding this inequality of the land ownership between countries. Maybe I missed it, sorry, but is there any reason that you think why there is a difference between inequality between countries? Thank you.
So as we know that Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, these two countries are like mountainous countries in the region, and there are like lots of rural people. They work in agricultural sector. They like not only cultivating crops, and they have like they are more engaged in livestock breeding, and maybe this also might be one of the reasons of the
access to the land. Yeah.
Yes, but currently in this in the current study, I didn't like do a cross-country analysis, but rather like regional dynamics. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so maybe one last question we can take. Yeah.
Thank you. Very fascinating research. I have a question. Maybe do you have that? Do you have a question regarding the educational background and whether the educational background could influence the decisions of owning the house or something related to that area?
There is a question in the survey about educational background, but in this study, I purposefully took only like employment sector and like family, like living arrangements, household structure. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for all the presenters. I think this was a very engaging session about gender, women in civic engagement, in labor, in land use. So I would like to make one small announcement, if I may. So about today's keynote speech. So in today's program, it was written Dr. Kathleen Hermans. So today we will have Dr. Asel Davlat-Keldieva as a keynote. And tomorrow we'll have Dr. Kathleen Hermans. Just a small note. Yeah, thank you everyone. And thank you for presenters.
tackling climate challenges through capacity building, through education programs, through community engagement, and through research. In our Graduate School of Development, we have the Mountain Society Research Institute. This is probably the leading collection of mountain and environmental scientists in the whole of Central Asia. We're also really proud that in 2025, we launched the inaugural version of our sustainable.
Welcome everyone. I think we're starting a bit late, at least 12 minutes. We'll start the session right now, and we will expect to finish around 3:30, so 10 minutes later. The format of this panel discussion is that we'll have 3 presentations, 15 minutes maximum, and then we'll have a joint discussion. I think it would be more productive this way, considering that all 3 presentations are well connected to one topic of the of framing memory and understanding. My name is Bakhytzhan Kurmanov. I'm your moderator. We have today 3 presenters, 2 offline and 1 online. We'll start first with in the order of the session with Svetlana Dzardanova, and it is my pleasure to present her. She represents Freedom for Eurasia. She is a well-known expert in gender and human rights, and she will present her guest co-authored research on framing femicide, analyzing news reporting in Uzbekistan. Please start. Your time is 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Svetlana Dzardanova. I represent Freedom for Eurasia. It's an Austria-based NGO working on human rights across Central Asia. And together with my colleague, Niginakhon Uralova, who's joining online today, we will present our research on how femicide is framed in online Uzbek media between 2014-2024. Before I move to our research, let me briefly explain what we mean by femicide. Most research defines femicide as women killed by men, usually intimate partners. And the term was first introduced by Diana Russell in 1976. And she later redefined the term to the murder of women by men, motivated by hatred, contempt, pleasure, or a sense of ownership. For this specific study, we use a more broad definition by UN Women and UNODC, who define femicide as gender-related killings of women and girls. And we do this intentionally because in some of our documented cases, perpetrators are also women. Such as mothers-in-law, daughters-in-law, or co-wives, but the killings, they still reflect gendered power dynamics and motivated by misogyny, and ultimately they benefit men. In Central Asia, including Uzbekistan, official statistics on femicide do not exist. State statistical agencies, they publish homicide numbers, but these numbers are not disaggregated by gender of the victim. And in this context, scraping and analyzing media outlets and court decisions, for instance, become a great alternative for us to understand and gain insight of the scope of the problem, its persistence, prevalence, and its patterns. So the first attempt to systematically collect data on femicide in Central Asia was made in Kyrgyzstan by 2 journalists, Saviya Hasanova and Anna Kapushenko. And their work inspired Uzbek journalist Luiza Atabayeva to also collect data set for Uzbekistan. Our team, building on her work and supported by UN Women, the School of Data and Data Against Femicide initiative, worked on verifying the cases she collected and also on expanding the data set. Our research team included Niginakhon, Saida, myself, Gulnoza Akhmedova, Denis Nazarova, who was our data engineer, and Saviya Hasanova as a mentor. So here you see the list of the keywords that we used for scraping media, online media in Uzbekistan. You can select as many words as keywords as possible, but we've seen that no matter how many specific words we have chosen, these 10 appear the most. So we only used for our search in between 2014 2024 these specific words. As I said, in Uzbekistan, not only the data, the official statistics on femicide is not existent, but also femicide is not legally defined as a distinct crime. So killings of women are persecuted under general homicide articles. As you see here, for instance, Article 97, premeditated murder, or Article 103, driving a person to suicide. So we additionally scraped Sud-Uz. This is an official Uzbek platform where they keep court decisions on cases. And we scraped the cases only following this list of criminal code articles. So here you see the list of the websites that we scrape data from. The specific websites have been chosen because of their popularity and also because of the fact that they publish information both in Russian and Uzbek. And the numbers in brackets reflect how many articles were scraped from each of the source. After the scraping, the data underwent both machine and manual cleaning. So authors would go through the headlines and also sometimes through the whole text of the articles to find out if they were really related to femicide cases. After this process, we ended up with an extended data set for Uzbekistan. It included 305 cases, within which there were 334 victims. This covered both the incidents of femicides in Uzbekistan and abroad among Uzbek migrant workers. From this data set, we could identify most prevalent types of femicide in Uzbekistan. And as you can see here, it follows the global statistics. And the most common type of femicide is intimate partner femicide, followed by familial femicide, which includes killings by fathers or mothers-in-law, daughters-in-law, and other relatives. Also, perpetrators in Uzbekistan, most of the perpetrators, more than 90%, were men. Women made up around 5% of perpetrators, and the rest of the cases, we either couldn't identify the perpetrator because it was not mentioned in the news piece, or the case was linked to a femicide-related suicide. We call it this femicide-related suicide because the person was driven to death by either her intimate partner or relatives. We also looked at the location of where women were killed, and this is also very common, and home still
is the most dangerous place for women to be. So as you can see, in more than 78% of the cases, women were killed in domestic settings. And these settings were either the perpetrator's home, their shared property, or the property of the perpetrator. So based on what we could find, we also wanted to look further and understand how does Uzbek media report these crimes. Because we consider that media framing matters, as it shapes public understanding of the crimes, attitudes towards these crimes, and in turn, it affects policy decisions and advocacy efforts. So in this specific research, we asked these following questions. To what extent does the Uzbek media depersonalize victims and perpetrators? How a femicide case is structurally framed? Does the media frame it as isolated events, broader social issue, or something in between? Or, and the last question is, what narratives dominate? What narrative frames are used in femicide reporting? At this point, I will stop and hand over to Nigina, and she will walk you through our analysis and findings of this research. How we do it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, just you have 5 minutes left for your presentation.
Can I see the what is being shown, because all the data is in the screen, and if I do not see the screen, I'm not sure like where I'm taking you to. No, I mean the presentation, not me. I don't need the public to see me. There is no need for that.
Презентующий должен видеть.
Yes, sorry, Nigina, but like, could you please share screen yourself, and then we're gonna just.
Yes, but I'm not given the right to share the screen so far. That's why I'm asking.
Just a minute. Admin rights would be given to you.
Is it now good?
Yes, we can see both you and your presentation. You can proceed.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Svetlana, thank you very much one more time. So before I move to the findings, I would like to talk about like what do we mean by the like a few key concepts, right? We first of all like cleaned up our data set. Like we had over 300 articles already piled up with multiple sources for each of them. So we excluded certain cases such as, for example, if the suicide did, for example, the case was viewed within the court case and was not reported widely by the media, because we were focusing on the media, and the suicides that were associated but not viewed as a crime under the article, or the when women killed themselves, and the focus of the article was on the women rather than the daughters she killed with herself, and etc. So after all this cleanup, we were left with over 200 articles, and we started analyzing it, right? So before I share the findings, I would like to talk about the key concepts that we use it, right? The first is depersonalization. It's when a perpetrator or the victim is stripped their identity and their details about their personal life is not given, and they are referred to as a wife or a girl or a daughter-in-law, etc. And the second concept is framing. And in simple terms, framing is how the media select and highlight certain aspects of reality, right? And with framing, we divide it like we look at 2 dimensions, right? One is structural and the second is narrative. Structural frames show how the story is organized, right? Episodic or thematic or quasi-thematic, we divide it, or it's narrative, right? Here, in contrast, we look at how story is told. It's about the tone, the moral background, like the perspectives, and etc. So, and we have 5 narrative styles that we identified. So here are our findings. So the first one is depersonalization. We found out that Uzbek online media, when reporting femicide issues, most of the time depersonalize both victim women and girls, and perpetrators, stripping their identity in the news coverage. About 17% of victims and 18% of perpetrators were were presented with their full names, right? 1/3 of perpetrators and 40% of victims, for example, they didn't have any name. They referred as a woman, as a wife, or most of the stories also did not include any details like such as their age, their job, their education, etc. This lack of identity turns victims into faceless figures and reduces public empathy and makes it nearly impossible to trace cases in the future work. Our second findings look at how femicide stories are framed in Uzbek media, right? We have two frames. The first one is structural frames, where almost 9 out of 10 articles were episodic, meaning that the articles focus on one single case of femicide, and most of the time they are reported within 300 words. Right, so it doesn't give any background. It doesn't relate the killing to a widespread public problems, social problems. Narratively, most stories combine the commonplace and the police framework or just facts framework, meaning that in one article, for example, that one article could have several narrative frameworks, but most of the time it's commonplace and police or just facts frame, right? The article would tell you briefly what happened, who died, all right? And they most of the time rely on police reports. Like if you read the article, it's as if you are reading the police report. It doesn't go here and there. Through all structural frames.
My apologies. You have 1 minute. Could you please conclude within 2 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you. 2 minutes is enough. So among the structures, there is only one thematic article. Among 200 articles, there is only one article that talks about the that links actually femicide issue while reporting one case of femicide, links the issue to the overall gender-based violence issue within Uzbekistan. And all others are mostly thematic or quasi-thematic. And narrative-wise, you can see the you can see the details later. So what we conclude. So our findings reveal that several consistent patterns in Uzbek media, right? First of all, there is a strong reliance on official statements that journalists take whatever the police or judges say in face value and report it as just as it. Secondly, both victims and perpetrators are heavily depersonalized. Their names, their stories are reduced to simple initials of their names, and victims often referred as a wife or a kilin or a daughter. Thirdly, femicide is usually framed as ordinary homicide, like it just happened. It is stripped from its gendered meaning and presented as another domestic dispute. And finally, we see frequent mitigation of perpetrators' actions through apologetic narratives, such as stories describing the violence as an act of out of despair or jealousy or family dispute or family conflict, instead of violence and accountability. With here, I will leave you, we're open for questions, and by following this link, you can also read our initial magazine article on how, about femicide in Uzbekistan in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Svetlana and Niginakhon, for your presentation on framing femicide. And now we move to our second speaker, Niginakhon Saida or Uralova. She is a PhD student at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, and she will present her paper or research on negotiating the Soviet past, how young people navigate state and family narratives in Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. Please proceed. Niginakhon, you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, once again. That's one more presentation from me. Today, I will be speaking about how young people in Uzbekistan perceive the Soviet past and how it affects their identity and their perception of the reality. I came to the topic purely through my own interest because, like, I'm a product of independence. I was born after Uzbekistan gained its independence. And growing up, I was exposed to different and at times conflicting narratives about how our country's past actually looked like, right? From one hand, my relatives would often tell about how everything was good during the Soviet times, right? About the quality, the cheapness, the affordability, travels, and etc. And at the same time, at school, we were exposed to a different story, how repressive the regime was before we gained independence. So this led me to my current PhD doctoral research, where I study how young people understand the Soviet past. Based on the oral stories they hear, based on the government narratives that is disseminated through school textbooks and the official media, and etc. So as part of my doctoral research so far, I have conducted 3 waves of interviews throughout Uzbekistan. As you can see here in the table, I have 44 interviews collected from most of the regions of Uzbekistan. I have a little bit biased findings, in a sense, like there are 2 biases I would want to mention. One is there are fewer male respondents among young people I talked to. 1/3 of respondents are girls or women, and 65% or 66% of them are male. And also, I unfortunately talked to mostly people with higher education. As you can see, almost 60% of my interviewees had a bachelor's degree, or they were studying like during their interviews. I would like to mention, like, by young people, I mean people who are born in 1991 or later on, right? Those people who absolutely never had the experience of living during the Soviet times. So, and so this research basically tries to understand the intergenerational memory transition from like elderly family members to young people, and at the at least like in the background of the government standing or government, I wouldn't want to use the word propaganda, but still there is a government perspective of the story as well, right? And then there is the elderly people's perspective, how this memory is transitioning from one generation to another through 2 or 3 different dimensions or mediums, I'm sorry. So, and I'm happy to share the findings. First of all, regarding the oral stories, almost all young people I talked to have heard about these nostalgic memories from their parents about the life during the Soviet times. Most of the time, those stories circle around how education was free, how the mobility was affordable, right? They could travel through the Soviet space without any need for visa or with money restrictions, etc. How everything was cheap. The common phrase I hear that young people pick it up from their grandparents or parents is that for 1 tien or 1 kopek you could buy a box of matches or bread, etc. At the same time, there are bitter memories as well, but those bitter memories often deal with the очереди, right? The queues, they stand to buy some things. They might have money, but they would not be able to buy because the stores would be empty, or there would be the acceptance of alcohol abuse among the public, or how they had to prioritize work over family values, how women had to work long hours in the cotton fields and etc. And they were not able to dedicate time for their children, for their family. So one distinction here I would make is that if their family, the people I talked to, if their family come from intelligent, what we call intelligentsia, right, or from rich family whose relatives were, let's say, persecuted during the Soviet times for their money or for their wealth or for their educated background, they would have more negative stories about the Soviet past compared to all other groups of people I talked to. And those oral stories would match to the previous research, for example, done by Dadabayev, who interviewed elderly people living in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and I guess in Kazakhstan too. And the majority of them have these nostalgic memories about the Soviet past and very few memories about the repressions and other negative aspects of it. My next part of the research dealt with the school teachings, because when I asked the young people what do they remember from history classes, they would often say that the history textbooks generally would depict the Soviet era as something repressive, dark chapter of the history, and most of the teachers would hold the same narratives, right? They would repeat what is written in the text. Very few people I talked to remember how their teachers would also become nostalgic and tell stories about the past times, about the Soviet times, being a little bit nostalgic. But overall tone is still negative. And many young people also approve the government's stand of textbooks depicting the past as more in a negative tone. Right. One thing that I found surprising was that the young people, especially born after 2000s, right, new generation, like Gen Z, if you call it them, they do not much remember how their school textbooks were. But at the same time, all groups, they have a more vivid understanding of the Soviet past through literature books rather than history textbooks, right? If the stories or novels that is shared during the literature classes as excerpts and others, right, contained information about the Soviet past, like the heroes lived in those times, whether it's like in the front or behind the front lines or serving in the country, like working at factories, etc. They repeat the same stories, the same authors, like the same literature pieces. And through those literature pieces, they understand what life used to look like during the Soviet period, before independence. There are a few other topics that would occur constantly. One of them is the perception of the World War II. I found it very interesting that many young people, especially the first generation after the Soviet period ended, right? Those born in 1990s, they used the word "not our war." It wasn't our war, right? They consider that Uzbek men, including all other Central Asian men, they were brought or they were sent to the front liners to fight in a war against their will, right? Most of them, they didn't even know what they were fighting for, and they use it as a human shield. They were given like very common story that, or very common perspective young people held, is that our soldiers were given, I'm saying our, like on their behalf, not like myself, I'm not including here, but they say our soldiers were given one rifle between two fighters, and they were used as a shield so that the Slavic army could go after them and fight the Nazi Germany. And it's those kind of understanding they have about the World War II. And I also can feel the bitterness in their talks, that they are unhappy that even after the war ended, the contribution made by Central Asian fighters, including Uzbeks, are not have not gained enough recognition in discussions that happen in the upper scale. Another topic that I found interesting, like it appears very rarely, especially this is about border redrawing, right? Young generation, born who are born after 2000s, they do not know much about the border redrawing or национальное размежевание, but those born in 1990s often refer to it as something that is done specifically to provoke ethnic tensions in Turkestan, right? By dividing the one nation into 3, 4, 5 and establishing Uzbek SSR, Tajik SSR, Kazakh SSR, and etc. So it's and also they see the deportation of Koreans or Crimean Tatars or other ethnicities from other parts of Central Asia to the territories of Central Asia as something provocative, right, to provoke ethnic tensions. But again, not all young people are aware of these. It's just those who know about it, they have negative understanding on the intentions behind those moves.
5 minutes left,
Thank
5
you.
minutes left.
Thank you. One point of contention is the hujum movement, right? The taking women out of the veil. Many young people view this movement as a tool for Moscow to force women into cotton fields and factories. This was seen as to strip the nation from its Islamic values and Islamic practices and replacing them with the Soviet ideals. Interestingly enough, both young people I talked to who practice Islam and who consider themselves liberal and progressive, they see the hujum movement as something negative. Even if they are okay with women taking their hijabs and veils off, such as like liberal progressive young people, they tell how the act was actually carried out with force, right, without leaving any choice for women as a negative thing. Both sides would consider like, okay, women were supposed to given a chance to decide for themselves. The contention part is only on whether they want women still to wear veil or not. And based on that, their perspective might differ a little bit. Industrialization, speaking of industrial changes, many people believe that Moscow did not want Central Asia to prosper, and all the industrial changes, the developments in urbanization and education were done not because of the goodwill, but because of the World War II, that the industrial units were needed to be taken away from the front lines and were brought to Central Asia, specifically into Uzbekistan too, and taking them back after the war to Russia was too costly, right? And speaking of urbanization, they note that most of the urbanization, first of all, happened within a small scale. And those happened within the territories where the Slavic settlers, Russian settlers who came to Uzbekistan or to other parts of Central Asia would live. So that was not done for the core population, as I understand from their talks. Interestingly, many young people share this sentiment that had Central Asia remained independent, the region would have experienced better development, right? They often romanticize the Jadidis who studied in Germany and tried to modernize the society, but they often tell how Jadidis were, or intelligentsia back those times in Central Asia, were kind of eliminated by the Soviet rule, and the society was actually stripped of their heroes in that sense. They also consider the alternative pathways, such as what happened if, for example, Germany won the war, or if European nations or some United States would invade it instead of the establishment of the Soviet Union. So in all cases, most of the time they have better perspective, and only a few young people I talked to would consider, like, if it was not the Soviet Union, maybe we, by we, I mean their perspective, right? If it was not for the Soviet Union, maybe there wouldn't be much development. Like if Khanates remained, maybe the country would look like Afghanistan. Like Afghanistan, that's what they give as an alternative option, right? So returning to the original question, these competing narratives between the government perspective and the oral stories that they hear from their parents. Young people do not take either side at the face value, right? Either stories, they listen, okay, they say like, okay, my parents or my grandparents are being nostalgic, and the government has their own agenda to force a certain narrative. So they took
You have
both of
1 minute left. My apologies.
Thank you. So I'm just concluding that they do not look at the two sides as competing, but something complementary, right? Everyday life might be good, but early years of the Soviet period was a little bit repressive, especially in terms of politics, and the school textbooks mostly focus on that. One thing I find very interesting was that how they are very much against the Russian language, not against, like they have Russian language is becoming more and more outdated, especially among young people who are born after 2000s. Majority of people I talked to do not speak fluent Russian, and they criticize the Russian language as a legacy of the Soviet Union remaining and having importance in today's Uzbekistan's everyday life. If you're interested, earlier on, I wrote a small article on Russian language's status and young people's perspective on it as a Soviet legacy in the Diplomat magazine. You can read it here by following the link, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Niginakhon, for your fascinating presentation. I think we'll have a lot of questions to first and second presentation. And now, last but not least, I would like to invite Mukaram Toktagulovu, who will be presenting as a researcher for SMD research platform, her research on voice of the people, time of change, social democratic movements in Kyrgyzstan in 1985-1991. So the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I will discuss today social movements in Kyrgyzstan in 1985 and 1991, which is, perestroika period, and social movements in Russia and the Baltic countries and in other parts of the Soviet Union studied very well. But in movements in Central Asia somehow ignored, and as a result, scholars claim that Central Asian republics, including Kyrgyzstan, received independence suddenly as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and they always stress this external factor as a collapse of the Soviet Union. And in our research, we try to challenge this claim and explore more about the social movements. How can I move? And there you see names of also researchers. This research was conducted by SMD research team, and you see names of the researchers there. It was a big group project. And we argue that history of, these social movements played a crucial plays a crucial role in understanding of the independence we gained because
Maybe you should point from zero.
There?
Forward.
This one? Doesn't work quite. Okay.
Let's see. Forward.
Yeah, about methods of the research, we collected interviews with participants of those movements and also with cultural elites who supported these movements, journalists, and also leaders of the movements. We collected about 100 interviews. And the second method was studying and analyzing memoirs, because leaders of these movements, for instance, Dzhapardikshiev, Turgunaliyev, Sadr Jumaghazi, Sadrullu, and others also published their books.
Let's try here.
Yeah.
No, this I think second button. Yeah.
Second?
Yes. This is okay. In the middle, yeah.
Okay, and then next, and Khazat Akhmatov, one of famous writers, Kyrgyz writers, who also published his book, and there you can find a lot of insights about these movements. And then last method was media analysis, because you know that first free media emerged in perestroika period, and Maidan or, for instance, other, for instance, Murokia, and this kind of free media were founded by activists of these social movements. And in 1987, one of Russian activists, Vitaly Ponomarev, visited Kyrgyzstan, and he published a brochure which is titled Kyrgyzia. And he pointed out that there are many social, many informal organizations in Kyrgyzstan, and he says that he mentioned about 30 informal organizations, and names of some of these informal organizations you see here. And we try to study histories of all these organizations, but in today's presentation, maybe I will focus only on one, on Ashar movement, which was very influential and which played a crucial role in the foundation of the first democratic movement, KDK or DDK. Yeah? Here you see not only Ashar, but also regional movements, regional informal groups like Oshaymagı, and also youth movement in Karakol, and organization of the young historians who were very active. You can see here some pictures about the demonstrations, protests, and some activities. For instance, here you can see hunger strike, yeah, and also how these activists influence on the adoption of the language law when it was adopted, yeah. They use different methods, and here you can see a timeline of those events. I will talk about them later. And in our research, we used social movement theory to analyze our findings. And there are two types of, we used the deprivation concept, and there are two types of deprivations, absolute and relative deprivation. Absolute deprivation means that a group of people, yeah, for instance, ethnic groups lack basic sources, but in case of Kyrgyzstan's context, we define that deprivation as relative deprivation because citizens of Kyrgyzstan, some groups in Kyrgyzstan at that time feel that they are disadvantaged or in comparison with other groups, for instance, Slavic citizens. For instance, Slavic citizens had access to many sources, for instance, housing, but in case of Kyrgyz citizens, it was a big problem. Housing issue was the main problem for this young generation of people because you know that qualified workers trained in Moscow, in Russia, and sent to Kyrgyzstan, and our micro districts in Bishkek today, yeah, so 7th, 8th, or 5th, all these micro districts were built in order to provide housing for these workers. But at the same time, it created a problem in structural inequalities because young Kyrgyz generation who came to the capital city to study, they had housing problem. Yeah, when they studied, of course, they were provided dormitories in the institutions or university, but if they wanted to stay in the capital city, it was very difficult because they didn't have access to this access to housing. And the only way for them to stay in Frunze was to rent accommodation, rooms or small houses from Slavic landlords. And that's why it became a big problem for young Kyrgyz ethnic citizens, and they started Ashar movement. Ashar was organized first as a kind of informal, very simple group of young house builders who seized a plot of land to build their houses. And later it became a very very complex movement. Why? Because if we look textbooks, history textbooks in Kyrgyzstan today, for instance, for higher school, you will see the very modest information about perestroika period. Perestroika was interpreted from the communist perspective as a kind of project which was initiated by the Communist Party, where they wanted to develop democratic ideas, implement democratic ideas, but at the same time, they don't mention social movements like Ashar or other movements. For instance, Ashar was presented as a small movement where people fought for their rights to solve their housing problem. But it was more than about solving housing problem, because these activists is connected. And these activists is connected also their problems with other historical events, and also to their rights to study, to learn their history, heritage, and to use their language. So it became very significant movement. For instance, here you can see some words which were explored when we started to analyze our data. And here you see, for instance, Urkun, as 1916 uprising, how this Ashar activists connected it to their history. For instance, housing problem was not for them only economic, let's say, social problem, but it was connected to Urkun, to colonization period, and they think that they lost their access to the land when Russians colonized, Russian Empire colonized this region, because land was taken, and then they moved to mountainous areas, and also in 1916s people fled to China, and it was how they connected their fightings or their struggle with their history. And also we find examples about how people were very supportive about Ashar movement. For instance, according to Sadir Ulu Jumagazi, one of leaders, more than 40,000, 50,000 people joined Ashar movement at that time. And that's why we see, for instance, today new settlements, which were built at that time, because it was a real problem for one group that they lack housing in the city, and they fought for their right to the city. And one of Kyrgyz poets, I will show, Kyrgyz poets expresses this Ashar activists' ideas about housing problem in his poem. He says that these people called by officials and in official media as invaders, invaders, and he says they called them invaders, but these young people didn't come from Cape Town or Congo. They came down from Alato, tending cattle in the mountains. Their only fault was that they came a little late. Since our ancestors didn't build a city, they decided to build it themselves, singing Kyrgyz songs, speaking Kyrgyz language, with their own appearance and beauty, together at the foot of their own banner, united in one Ashar. Your sons, daughters began their work. Do not withhold your help, my people, because in perestroika period, state media published a lot of articles about these Ashar activists, and they named them invaders, захватчики, and here Turgumbayev explains the goal of this Ashar movement. Their main goal is not to start a conflict, but their goal was to build the city, because they have now a capital city, but that is another city, because he thinks that they take the meat and milk discrete lakes and rivers, what good is it for the people in the factors and the plants built on the land? So in short, he says, he here talks about Soviet system, yeah, and he says that they also built the city, but the city is not for local people. It's only for Slavic people. And this system, Soviet system, uses all sources because local people send all sources to the center, and that's why it's not for them. City is not for them, yeah, and city environment is not friendly for them because they can't use their language. You know that all these Kyrgyz young people came from rural areas and their first language was Kyrgyz, and in the cities they had to speak Russian, yeah, and city environment was unfriendly for them. So it's how they framed goals and their activities, but it was different in state, I mean, from officials' perspective.
Could you please finish within 1 minute?
Yeah. And in conclusion, we can say that when Ashar movement was started and they organized different demonstrations, protests, they looked on housing problem in connection to their history, for instance. Their right to learn, study their cultural heritage, for instance, monastic, history, and also to their right to speak their own language and in connection to their right to live in the city. And our final goal was to challenge that claim, which was mentioned in the beginning, that Kyrgyzstan citizens were passive receivers. No, they were not passive, and they also organized different protests and demonstrations to fight for their independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukarram. Could you please? So thank you, presenters Svetlana, Niginakhon, and Mukarram for your great presentations. And now we open floor for questions. So please raise your hands or heads if you have questions. So, yeah, okay, yeah, we have.
Thanks a lot for.
Could you please present yourself?
Yeah. My name is Daria. I'm from ISDC. I have a question to Mukarram. Do you currently work on any other researchers at SMD or anything new that is happening there?
Yeah, we are planning to start research about челночество, про женщин. Yeah.
Yeah, we have another second question here.
Yeah, so my question is also to Mukarram. So what are the sources that you use for analyzing this Ashar movement of 90s?
Could you present yourself?
Yeah, I'm Gulzata Gimberdi, a PhD at Humboldt University.
Okay, so you mean theoretical, yeah? Yeah, the framing theory was used, how the activists frame, yeah, this movement, and also, yeah, I mentioned about social movements, yeah, social movements theory, yeah.
I have a question to Niginakhon, our second presenter. So I listened to your presentation very well, and the topic is fascinating. I have several questions, but I will just ask one. Do you think that social media and portrayal of Soviet Union in social media could affect how young people think about that time? Because for instance, recently Berik Boldukeyev from Nazarbayev University published an article in Journal of Genocide Research where he showed that young people in Kazakhstan, for instance, they are affected by social media in terms of how they understand the famine in 1930s in Kazakhstan, and most of them believe that it was a genocide, but it's affected by not by the oral histories and the relatives or history textbooks, but it is strongly affected by what they see in Instagram and Facebook. So the question is, have you ever focused on that, or maybe during your interviews, people mentioned that they follow someone on Instagram or Telegram. In Uzbekistan, I know Telegram is very popular. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And yes, actually, what is challenging the both oral stories and the government perspectives, right? If we took these two perspectives as a little bit competing with each other, what is challenging both those perspectives are actually internet sources, and it's not just like Wikipedia pages or the articles here and there, but actually the podcasters that is being streamed not by the government media, but bloggers, right? In Uzbekistan, they're inviting like historians, like they are like speaking of this. And this fascination about the Jadidis is also stemming from the media itself. I think within the past 5 years, there is like a strong emphasis on making a lot of media products on what Uzbek Jadidis or Central Asian Jadidis did for the region or for the country. And there is a strong romanticization of them. So based on that, like I had, like, for example, a few people who told me how they would, for example, come from work and read certain books or read certain internet online materials to cross-check against what they study at school. But those findings come later in life, right? If you talk, for example, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, they do not even think about those period, like give much thought about it. They mostly focus on their university examinations and other things. But once they go about like over 25, 30s, they already start like independent investigation, like listening into podcasts and other media materials, shaping their own understanding. So I would say like Birpul Dukeyeva's research indeed like comes in hand here, which aligns with my findings as well.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? There is one question or comment. Yes.
Sorry, just a note that we have also online
Yes,
participant who wants to ask a question.
Okay, let first you, then second online participant.
Okay, my name is Ilya. I'm from Laboratorium Journal, George Washington University. I have a question to Mukram as well about your sources, but we saw that there are interviews, memoirs, and so on. So these are kind of interpretations. But what about archival data? Have you like also accumulated some archival data? Have you accessed it? Thank you.
Archival, no, we used one more method, focus groups. We discussed, we organized focus group with activists of this moment, but archival, no.
And could we please connect our online participant and let her or him ask a question?
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear. Please speak up and ask your
Yes.
question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bano. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam. I have questions for all three talks, if that's okay. If you have the time, you can answer them. So Niginakhon and Svetlana, thank you so much for the incredible research and presentation on femicide. I think it's insanely important for the Central Asian region, and I wish there was more research done into that. Just a small question about the data that you had. Did you collect the age of the victims? And if you didn't, was there a specific reason for that? And a question for Niginakhon and her PhD research as well. Thank you so much, extremely insightful, and I would love to have a conversation with you about your topic. But my question was about the So in the title, you have Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. Will you be collecting data on Kyrgyzstan? And when you do, will you be, do you intend to compare it with Uzbekistan, or what is the kind of idea behind your research and inclusion of both of the countries? And the question for Mukarram, it was an incredible publication. I read it the day that it came out on Esim'de. Thank you so much for this. I am a historian of Soviet Central Asia, specifically Soviet Kyrgyzstan. A more of a difficult question, I would say. Would you say that this movement was a fight for independence from the Soviet Union, or was it more of a fight for rights of Kyrgyz people within the Soviet Union? And if you see the difference between the two. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think we will start in the order first Svetlana, then Niginakhon, and then Mukarram, if it's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Banu, for your question. Yes, we collected various data across 54 variables, including age of the victims, location where they lived, their marital status, education status, whether they had or not children. We also collected information, whatever we could, on perpetrators. And based on this information, we moved further to look into how much of this information on both victims and perpetrators were available in Uzbek media. So this is how we ended up with this depersonalization idea, to look at how Uzbek media presents the victims. Whenever there is lack of information on the victim, they become just another statistics. They don't receive much empathy from the reader, and this also affects the perception of the crime. This goes as well to the victims. In many cases, this vital information on even their names were concealed, and sometimes this is understandable if the process is ongoing. But when we read, for instance, court decisions and cannot obtain this data, it's a bit strange, because we do want to know who the perpetrators are, and we also do want to know who the victims are. Thank you.
Thank you, Niginakhon.
Adding on Svetlana's answer, I just wanted to make that we didn't analyze like the average age of the victims, for example, or average age of perpetrators, because we didn't have enough data, right? We have like a certain percentage of their year of birth. Sometimes we have like a familiar age, right? For example, young women who are killed, right? We don't know what like young, for example, refers to. So we do not have exactly the average age or medium age, etc. But we can say like the victims of across all age groups, including young children who are mostly killed by their own parents, right? And the elderly women too, like killed by their daughters-in-law, for example. So I hope this would be studied further. And thank you very much for your question on my PhD dissertation as well. The reason why I included Kyrgyzstan is like I wanted to look at Central Asia as a whole region, right? And taking just Uzbekistan wouldn't do. And I look at for like the countries with similar background. And my initial idea was that there would be much influence of religion. And Uzbekistan is the most populated country with like 80% of them like being Muslim. And Kyrgyzstan is also like religion is very much practiced, and they have these linguistic similarities unlike Tajikistan. Right, so that's why I took both Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. And so far I had conducted 3 waves of interviews, January to February, May to July, and recently through September. Like I traveled throughout Uzbekistan. And yes, I do intend to conduct interviews with young people from Kyrgyzstan as well. This year I couldn't go there. Unfortunately, I planned to go to this conference also like in person. It just didn't happen. And yes, in the future, I would also collect about like at least 50 interviews all around Kyrgyzstan, and then we'll combine and try to find similarities between 2 countries. Will they represent like their perspectives, represent this regional perspective, and where there are differences.
And Mukarram, yeah.
Yeah, in our research, we claim that it was kind of fight for the independence, because I didn't mention many sources which we analyzed in our project. For instance, famous lawyer Nurbekov, and his thoughts about sovereignty was discussed in this paper also. Or we can also mention about cultural elites' contribution, who were very critical about Soviet Union's policy concerning language and using local sources, and for instance, or about how history was studied. For instance, Saburat Tokurov, one of famous ethnographers, was in jail because he started to teach pre-Soviet history in his classes. Or Tugulbay Sıdıkbekov, another very famous writer, criticized the Soviet Union that it forces people to speak not their native language, and also to this time also, for instance, KDK, as main movement which was formed in Perestroika period. They introduced multi-party system, which was also important. And if we compare with other Central Asian countries, because Kyrgyzstan's case was most successful, if we look on examples of other Central Asian countries, for instance, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, for instance, about, if we mention Jeltokhson or Karimov's regime, so we can compare that. In 1991, Kyrgyz people removed Communist Party leader Basayev when Kazakhstan and in Uzbekistan, these communist leaders stayed there, in the election of the first president, these activists played a great role. They organized hunger strike near the governmental building, and they made it visible, and whole community supported them. So we claim that it was, but it was very different. It wasn't military protest. It wasn't a very, a big conflict, but at the same time it was peaceful through resolving the social problems. They achieved very good results.
So thank you. I think we are out of time and finishing on time. So thank you, audience, and let us all thank our presenters for the great presentations. Thank you, and I believe that all presentations will be uploaded to LiK website if authors are fine with that, so you can find it later. Thank you.
Mountains are the lifeblood of our planet, nurturing water systems, supporting ecosystems, and sustaining millions of lives. Yet, they stand at the front lines of the climate crisis. Rooted in the mountain regions we call home, the University of Central Asia is deeply committed to protecting these fragile environments. Our focus on climate and sustainability is not just a research priority, it is the very heart of our mission and identity.
These mountain regions are known as the water towers of Central Asia, and the impacts of change here ripple down across borders, across nations, to millions of people downstream. So protecting our mountains isn't just a local concern. The very future of our region depends upon it. Well, at UCA, we're addressing climate challenges through capacity building, through education programs, through community engagement, and through research. In our Graduate School of Development, we have the Mountain Society Research Institute. This is probably
Dear colleagues and guests, welcome to the session titled Women's Agency, Identity and Well-Being in Central Asia. My name is Asil Murzakulova. I'm a senior research fellow at the University of Central Asia, and I'm pleased to moderate this session today. This session brings together three distinguished scholars who examine women's lived experience, cultural identities, and agency across diverse social settings in Central Asia. Our first presenter is Altyn Kapalova, research fellow at University of Central Asia. Altyn is a cultural anthropologist and artist whose research focuses on gender, identity, and traditional knowledge systems in Central Asia. Her presentation women's mental health recovery practices in traditional Kyrgyz culture, explores how women have historically drawn on cultural and spiritual practices to maintain mental and emotional well-being. And I'm very looking forward for this presentation. Altyn, the floor is yours.
Здравствуйте, дорогие коллеги. Сегодня я буду рассказывать о результатах, о первых результатах своего исследования, которое сфокусировано на традиционных практиках заботы ментального здоровья среди женщин в Кыргызстане. Вот, и сейчас время посмотрю. В целом, я вообще это исследование презентовала только в художественной среде, среди арт-практиков и терапевтов, и очень хотела презентовать это в научной среде, чтобы быть очень скучной исследовательницей и рассказывать про методологию и так далее. Но в целом, говоря о методологии и о фокусе исследования, я очень часто, когда я рассказываю про это исследование, происходит такое автоматическое обрамление, что это про народную медицину. И я сразу хочу сказать, что это не так. То есть у нас есть вот народные лекари, да, есть бахши, тауып, тамырчи, очень много разновидностей, но это не про них. Я это очень хочу подчеркнуть. И также это не про официальную медицину, это про те практики, для выполнения которых женщине нужна она сама и больше никто, но в каких-то случаях это могут быть коллективные практики. Вот, поэтому вот хочу подчеркнуть и сразу снять вопрос о том, что это исследование не про бахши там, или там шаманок там, другого толка, это про женщин и их практики, которые они могут выполнять в очень домашних условиях каждый день. Ну, не каждый день. Вот. Фотографии, сразу хочу сказать, это не рандомные фотографии с интернета, это все фотографии из моих исследований, проектов и несколько архивных фотографий, которые в открытом доступе. Вот, и вообще, как выглядел опросник, он, конечно же, был очень заточен на то, ну, на вопросы, какого рода практики вы выполняете, там, но плюс еще вопросы были о том, что вы чувствуете, как вы себя чувствуете во время выполнения этих практик и после. А свет выключить нельзя, да? Желтый цвет мне прям тревожно. Вот и нормально? Хорошо видно? Хорошо. И вот, как я уже сказала, что большинство практик, о них я расскажу чуть позже, они могут выполняться одной женщиной, вот она сама в одиночестве может их делать, но также есть коллективные практики, как совместное валяние войлока и другие процедуры. И вообще вот тоже мы обсуждали в университете этот топик и тоже говорили о том, вообще с практической точки зрения, почему для меня это исследование очень важно, потому что на самом деле к услугам психотерапевтов у нас нет доступа, да, ну то есть это очень ограниченный, ну ограниченное количество городов, может быть в Бишкеке, там в Караколе, в Аше, насколько я знаю, еще, то есть нет доступа, нет достаточно количества психотерапевтов, нет этой пока что культуры ходить на психотерапию, и плюс языковой барьер. Все психотерапевты, которые сейчас практикуют, они все русскоязычные. И это тоже большая проблема. Я лично тоже с ней столкнулась, потому что я хотела ходить на психотерапию и говорить со своей психотерапевткой на кыргызском языке, но это в Бишкеке было невозможно. Я думаю, что в селах в принципе нет таких услуг. Вот, и тоже, переходя к результатам исследования, одно из основных тоже выводов исследования, что, к сожалению, все эти практики очень сильно вкраплены в каждодневную, очень патриархальную рутину. То есть это не так, что есть такие практики, где женщина может уединиться, но их меньше, а большинство практик, они очень сильно то есть это между заботами о детях, о членах семьи, между готовкой, иногда даже саму готовку женщина обозначает как терапию. Ну, то есть это очень сильно вплетено в каждодневную патриархальную повседневность женщин. И переходя к самим практикам, как выглядит вообще сейчас исследование? Это просто очень длинный список с описаниями этих практик. Я все это, конечно, не могу сейчас рассказать, но мы надеемся, что на следующий год будет издание, и это будет не научное издание, это будет больше практическое, которое можно будет читать и что-то, возможно, применять для себя, да, что подходит. И все эти практики пока что я поделила на 3 группы. И вот первая очень большая — это практики, которые очень сильно связаны с природой. Они связаны с деревьями, с водой, особенно рекой, но не только, вообще с почвой, да, самой землей, растениями и воздухом. Следующая большая группа — это, я их называю креативными практиками, и сюда входят все виды ремесел, да, валяние войлока, вышивание, там создание курака, огромное количество их, и они описаны в исследовании. Также сюда же я внесла пение плачей, да, традиционный кыргызский плач, кошок и игры. И последняя группа, тут пока что меньше по количеству практик, это каждодневные ритуалы с использованием огня, шептаний и самого тела. Вот, и я хочу привести несколько примеров таких практик. Например, из первой группы есть такая практика «Сырыңды суға айт», да, расскажи свой секрет или тайну в воде. И я не все опробовала, но вот этот опробовала, и это работает. То есть это зародилось там, где есть река, да, то есть везде, когда я смотрю, где говорили респондентки, это вот в Нарыне, на Иссыкуле, в селах, где рядом протекает достаточно большая река, нужно к ней спуститься и встать не лицом к течению, а вот, я не знаю, как это правильно сказать, и сказать, и рассказать реке свои тревоги. И тут женщины говорят о том, что есть какие-то вещи, которые тебе стыдно поделиться с кем-то, или даже сложно произносить, потому что он связан, допустим, со страхом смерти близких или еще что-то, или что-то происходит, ты никому не доверяешь, и вот есть такая практика. Вот. Или шамджагу, да, когда это я тоже наблюдала в домах во время полевых исследований, когда ночевала у женщин, перед сном зажигают арчу и шепчут, и в основном, насколько я могла это расслышать, это какие-то благопожелания себе, своим близким и так далее. Вот. И в третий, как пример, я включила, тут кошок, песнопение, потому что вот, ну, все практики, которые я рассказываю, они очень хорошо изучены на самом деле, но с другой перспективы, как часть фольклора, да, допустим, кошок мы знаем, да, как часть погребальных там, ритуалов, но я говорю совсем, ну, с другой призмы, потому что до этого исследования они изучали кошок как больше социальное явление, да, и так далее, и мало вообще исследований, которые ставят во главу угла саму женщину, да, то есть процессы и ее место в обществе, в сообществе, в семье всегда важнее, в том числе для ученых. Тут я кошок рассматриваю именно как терапию, потому что, как многие из вас знают, кошок это не только в дни там, похорон, в течение года женщина может закрываться и оплакивать близкого человека, которого не стало. И по сути это единственное такое легитимное время, когда женщина может уединиться и остаться со своей болью и пережить потерю, да, сам процесс. Вот это тоже из исследований этого года. Очень часто отмечают как терапию работу с тестом. И я вообще очень долго игнорировала это, потому что, ну, это тоже часть, это вроде бы акт заботы и любви, но это очень большой труд для меня. Но потом все-таки как бы я включила, как и все другие вещи, которые вышли из интервью. И вообще говоря об этом и о многих процедурах, вот выделились два таких слова, которые я тоже беру как очень важные. Это алахсу, да, потому что это отвлечься от чего-то. То есть когда женщина рассказывает о практиках, которые им помогают сохранять их ментальное состояние, здоровье, они говорят Аллах сатат, да, то есть отвлекает от тревог, от повседневных забот и так далее. И другой термин сана, сана тарту — это переживать, да, это какие-то глубокие переживания о ком-то, о чем-то, что происходит в жизни человека. И многие практики в итоге, они... Осталось? Многие практики в итоге направлены на то, чтобы снизить тревогу. Вот, и когда я говорила про воздух, тоже хотела остановиться на этом. Ну, сейчас такой этап исследования, когда я все еще собираю материалы, и есть такое стойкое ощущение, что есть больше знаний, до которых еще нужно, ну, как бы нужно копать еще. И вот как пример я привожу дем, вдох, да, и как много вообще в кыргызском языке слов, понятий, процессов, связанных с дыханием, да, и такое ощущение, что мы очень подзабыли, не подзабыли, а забыли многое, и можно вернуться к нашим традиционным знаниям. Вот просто посмотреть одно слово, и это не единственное слово, я просто в качестве примера. Вот, и говоря вот о ремеслах, я хочу подчеркнуть вот создание тумаров не как, ну, тумары — это очень понятно, это традиционные амулеты, в них очень много магических смыслов закладывали люди, когда их создавали, что они оберегают во время дальних поездок там, или во время болезни. Но в этом исследовании, слушая женщин, я поняла, что это прежде всего для той женщины, которая это шьет, потому что это очень сильно помогает ей побороть какие-то сильные тревоги о близких. Вот, и завершая вообще свое выступление, так как осталось время, это вот То есть я сгруппировала и сделала список всех видов ремесел, которые показывали. И тут вы видите курак, да, лоскутное искусство, различные фотографии. И они тоже, я их вот во второй группе рассматриваю, но на самом деле они очень неразрывно связаны с природой, да, и в целом тоже один из моих выводов, что все ментальные традиционные практики, они очень сильно связаны с природой и с ремеслами. И дальше я просто вам покажу красивые картинки с полевых исследований. Ну, то есть вы видите тут баткен, это реально баткенские подушки. Вот. И на этом я заканчиваю свое исследование. Ой, презентацию, спасибо. Исследование еще не заканчивается.
Сейчас будем вопросы-ответы.
Окей, сразу, да?
Огромное спасибо за твою презентацию, за такое очень важное исследование. Мне кажется, я пока его слушала, сама получила какую-то терапию, если честно. У нас есть небольшое время на вопросы-ответы. Пожалуйста, буквально 2 вопроса. So now the floor for Q&A is open. Please, if you have questions. Peter, please.
I don't feel very qualified to comment on this session, Martin Petrick from Gießen University, but I enjoyed it, and not the least because your illustrations were so mind-warming, I think. Just look at this one here, for example, right? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question actually goes a step further, and I'm not sure, well, I'm just asking it. Do you think men in traditional areas of Kyrgyzstan are also concerned about their mental well-being?
Вот я не могу ответить на этот вопрос, потому что я не исследовала. Ну, я думаю, что есть практики, потому что на самом деле даже вот если мы возьмем кошок, это очень не женское, но есть мужские практики, да, например, укрепкелю, да, когда тоже плач разрешенный для мужчин. Поэтому я думаю, что на самом деле практики есть как мужские, так и женские. И мы тоже как-то проводили, вот Асель проводила воркшоп, и наши коллеги-мужчины спросили, а нам можно? Конечно, можно, потому что это прежде всего о каких-то практиках, о человеческих. Просто я делаю акцент на женщинах, потому что это область моего исследования и в связи вообще с тем, что происходит в Центральной Азии в отношении женщин. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое за вашу презентацию. I'm gonna ask you in English because I miss vocabulary. Do you work also on trauma? Because mental health is also linked to trauma and usually to our gender-based violence. So are you working on that field as well? And if yes, what are your research and results? Thank you very much.
Да, спасибо за ваш вопрос. Я не работаю последние 5 лет с этой темой очень намеренно, потому что я 7 лет была в активизме и помогала женщинам, пережившим насилие. Поэтому в этом исследовании я берегу себя, и я его начала для того, чтобы говорить о насилии, о травмах тоже через какие-то жизнеутверждающие вещи, чтобы женщины могли себе хоть немного помогать. Поэтому я очень понимаю ваш вопрос. Я работала с этой темой, у меня есть какие-то уже вещи, можно их почитать, посмотреть, но в данном исследовании нет.
Спасибо.
Спасибо большое, Алтын, за вашу презентацию. So our next speaker is Dr. Damiris Inaliyev, Senior Researcher at the Leibniz Institute of Vegetables and Ornamental Crops. Dr. Inaliyev's work focuses on development economics, social inequality, and the use of household data for policy impact in Central Asia. Today, he will present very interesting turn, I think, in his career. So The subject of today's presentation, Almash and Beyond, lived experience of daughters named in hope of sons. We're very looking forward for your presentation. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. I'm as excited as you possibly to present this research because it's absolutely unusual for me to do such research. Let me start with a story. 2 years ago, we came to a vacation with my family, and my oldest aunt died in Isekul in Bakhytzhan. So my wife and with all our siblings, we went to funeral. So we come into the house where many people staying. It's day of funeral. So my wife stays here, and one of my aunts stays like 30 meters across. And this huge amount of people just standing and waiting. And there is a cry from my aunt to my wife saying, Damir needs son. In front of people, she's demanding that me need son from my wife. Yeah, embarrassment from everywhere, but that kind of episode tells you what I'm going to talk about here. So I call it Almash and Beyond, and it's joint work with my wife. Her name is Erkina, and she used to do research, and she still does from time to time research and mixed methods. And it's something I was thinking for years. It's something that everyone, most Kyrgyz people know it exists, it's among us. Even Altan said she has sister named Jungle, right? And I was thinking, how can we use it? There should be some potential. And I started just talking to this woman. And that's how it started. And I need a clicker somewhere. Oh. Okay, is it clicker?
Yes.
Oh, центральный, middle one. Okay, I don't think it's working. Okay, so the study explores cultural practice of giving names to girls with explicit or rather implicit sometimes desire for the next son to be a son, for next baby to be a son. Yeah, so Almash, Swab, Burul, Turn, Murzagul, son, son Uljan or Ulkelsin. Yeah, so all this mean more or less that next child rather to be a son. So definitely expresses gender preferences within families, and we conducted in-depth interviews with women who have such names, and some of you helped to find those women and to understand how these names affect the identity, family relations, coping mechanisms, and long-term psychological impact. It's work in progress, and I'm presenting partly or mainly to get your feedback and some ideas how to proceed with this work. So whatever I'm presenting is more or less based on more or less my recollection of during conversations, but not all the text interviews are still processed and analyzed in a proper way. So son preference is a quite large literature. So Central Asia is not famous in this literature, but South Asia is famous. So mostly if you look at literature, comes from practices of South Korea, China, and other countries in South Asia. And it definitely comes from the Nobel Prize winner, Amartya Sen, who is saying about 200 million women missing. So in this case, it is non-missing women, but still kind of carrying some preference kind of sign. So there are many reasons why son preference exists. Patrilineality, more or less, Sanjar in Kyrgyz culture definitely contains only male names, inheritance rules, women's position in labor market, and other areas, and high dowry in some cultures when parents need to give a lot of money or to give their daughters for marriage. So what happens if such thing exists? Usually high fertility rates. So couples keep having more children till a son or desired number of sons is born, which means that girls in such families live in larger families, and if resources are limited, per capita resource distributed among daughters will be potentially less. In case of strict birth controls, like in China, in strict control policies, there could be even sex-selective abortions, right? It brings, again, distortions to demographic structure. As I said, Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia is not yet famous, but definitely there are studies looking at exactly, for example, looking at demographic structure. Kazenin, looking at 2012 DHS data, finds that if family has 2 or 3 daughters, likelihood of having more children is much higher. And definitely other works looking at Central Asia or wider Central Asia also say it's taking place that when there are girls each after, there are more siblings in those households. And I should say it's not only present in Kyrgyzstan, such naming, but also definitely in Kazakhstan, some parts of Uzbekistan, but also even in Turkey. It's a bit affects all the generations, but I'm going to show you some chart later. But just once again, there are many names of such variations. So looking through the naming, I practically have a library of about 130 names, with variations with Burul or Jungle being kind of central. But some of them quite implicit. So Umut is Nadezhda, yeah, so it may mean many things, but Ulkelsin is quite explicit. So estimated 3 to 4% of ethnic Kyrgyz female have such names. It's my estimate. I'm going to show how I come up with such number, but it definitely means more percentage of households are affected, because in a family, the naming starts at certain time, yeah? After third daughter, I'm going to talk about it. The sources are, for example, there is website of National Voters List, so you can just search for Burul or Jungle, and it will give you names of all people who carry such names. And I went through that one, all possible 130 versions, and it's about 2 to 3%. And as person who collects data and has access to names, that's where I got my more precise data, especially using LiK. And here, how I calculated, and there are other surveys. I was primary data, meaning in a data collection team, having access to such names, and this is my estimates. So in terms of numbers, it doesn't look too big, but 3%, I think it's considerable amount to work with. I guess this one is already a big finding. So you're looking at more or less 100 years of some preference based on such names. And I divided people by 10-year birth cohorts, starting from before 1930 and looking at evolution over time. And what is striking is definitely the period around Second World War, when such names less prevalent. Right after the war, next decade is highest. Yeah, so, and over time, it looks like jumps a little up and down, but from this interview, it's also clear that such practice is declining. There are at least 2 reasons. There are not many kids families have, and parents want them to be kind of more educated and have a happy life. Okay, 5 minutes. So this is one of the motivations why I started this qualitative study, because I hope it can translate to quantitative study at some point. So we asked more or less how the naming process goes, what do they feel, and interfamily, and more or less societal impacts. And as I said, 16 women. And let me just jump into sample characteristics. So it was more or less this year, age 41 on average. Siblings 6, mostly named by grandmother and grandfather. Birth order 3 or higher, and seems to be, as my friend Philip asked, does it work? From this very small sample, it seems to be does work. 69% of them had a brother after them. So more or less, not say finding, but observation number 1, it's grandparents who name them. It's mostly grandmother. So I think this number I calculated. So it more or less reflects desire of previous generation to have gender parity in families of their children. Now, second one, it comes again and again, high pressure on mothers of these women. So there are stories of a woman giving birth, having 11 children, finally having son, but not really seeing that son growing, and kind of, so she died, yeah? So in terms of poor health. But definitely what it comes is that unless she delivers a son, there could be risk or potential of risk in terms of divorce or being poorly treated. In some regions, it's different. It's more severe unless a woman delivers son. It could be that her position also undermined. Definitely a girl grows, and at some point she realizes what her name means, and it comes around teenage, yeah, so around 10 or so, and it depends what happened after her. If there is a brother, younger brother after her, she's really treated well. She's my Guten, yeah, because in Kyrgyz, so it's Omen, and there is a lot of like very positive legends that she's the one who brought this son, and it was very positive story around her name, and she's proud of her name that she made that function, yeah. But in a couple of cases, there was no brother at all, and in such cases, it seems to be the psychological strain is much negative and much stronger. So as I said, psychological impact comes during adolescence, and classmates start teasing, yeah, like, and many people also during her lifetime start asking, did you have brother after you? And that is throughout the life, and at some point they internalize, and it's kind of common to hear such question, and they say, it's okay. So many said, no really bad treatment, we felt fine, our father was great, so nothing. But in a couple of cases, women said, we tried to kind of replace son, helping father outside or kind of competing with boys. So that's another aspect of not really widespread, but takes place. Naming usually starts with number 3. Yeah, so first daughter named Beauty, Precious, Princess. Second, about the same. And the third is like, we need to do something. Yeah, so so one older lady said it's 357 pattern. So number 3, number 5, number 7, but it didn't come through in our data. So it's could be number 4, could be number 6. So it starts with number 3, and it starts with mild naming like Burul Jungle, but it may really go explicit. Yeah, Ulgelsin, Ulbolsun. So that is a bit okay. Next one is what? So yeah, it's a part of many things, yeah? So it's not only naming, but also making sure that little things to do, like bringing a clothing of a just born boy from neighbors and kind of keeping at house so that boy brings another boy in our place. like prescribing certain diet to couple and other things, or I'm not sure to learn if there is anything, but it's part of all efforts people believe can help to deliver son as the next child. So summary, so here we are. So we got these interviews, we going to analyze them using NextQDA, we believe, is the right tool. And yeah, at the end, just to see what comes out. I'm also learning how to do qualitative analysis, and with the help of many of you who do such work, I hope it comes something interesting. But as I said, my aim is to move to quantitative stuff using access to the names. Possibly there are, in quantitative terms in surveys, kind of long entrenched features of women who have such names, which differ from women who have more or less normal, beautiful names. So that's where I stand. And if you have suggestions, questions, or more people to interview, we'll be happy to talk to you. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Damir. And our floor for question is open. Please, if you have questions, comments, suggestions, recommendations of further respondents, please. Yeah, please.
I'm sorry to always ask a question, but I mean, this is a super intriguing topic, I think, and I can only congratulate you, Damir, in taking this turn. Because I believe it can be deeply relevant for individuals, right, who are in one way or the other affected by this, as you also pointed out. So very, very well done. I have just two questions of understanding, or one actually. So did I understand you correctly? In LiK, you do have information about the names of people that you used for this study, or that you plan to use for this study? You know the names of people. Yeah.
I'm the one who have access, right?
Pardon?
I'm the one who have access.
You have access at least to it, yeah.
I mean, I have to have access
to everyone in the family and so on. It's recorded actually, the names of those people. Yeah. All right. I think your data actually defies your very first conclusion. I mean, you found in the figure that you showed that in the last year of observation, I think it was 1.4% or so that was affected by this practice, right? So you say it remains a common cultural practice. Would you say this is consistent with 1.4%?
Yeah, it remains. We had conversation with a girl, 21 years old, whose name is Burul. So in a way, I would think it should be more or less and less, but it still exists. It's a new generation that still are given such names.
I mean, other politicians maybe who are into this topic would say, well, your numbers show very clearly it's almost completely eradicated, and it's really only absolutely rare and unique cases where it still happens, so we don't have to worry about it anymore.
So at least a father of this girl is of my age, yeah. So I believe that all the generations that to blame, more or less, is still doing that practice. But more or less, I look at this as more historical study. Given the chart you've seen, it really shows what was going on and how this big events like wars affect people's choices.
That's super interesting, no doubt. Yeah.
But one thing what happens now, there was a girl who said, I have two names. She's called Burul, but she also, through Quran, through Islam, she also has second name. And when she gets to know, present herself, she uses that name, not Burul one. So that was interesting observation as well.
Okay. I have two questions. Sainat, University of Central Asia. Last 3 years, I Googled top 10 names in Kyrgyzstan, and I didn't notice these names. But I also assume that, now like it's very popular to give the names with Arabic root from Quran. in your research, did you study those names? We might not know the meaning, but because we don't know, I mean, Arabic, but the meaning is the same. This is the first question. And the second question, regarding the name Jungle, I have a relative who has two names, and the second name is Jungle, but not because they wanted the son after it, but because she had a disease. And in order to get rid of that, the family kind of changed the name. So there is such kind of experience. I think you can consider too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think definitely Islam is affecting how girls are named, and definitely boys as well. So that's another factor, a power that coming into interplay. I think I will look at your question regarding the meaning of those names, but seems to be Islam is also saying if you have 3 daughters, you will be in heaven. So I am in heaven. I have 3 daughters. But I think Islam is a big part of that decline, especially in recent years. And yeah, Jungle Mirza, for example, is also a very hero woman. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily mean it relates to some preference, but rather to be have a very strong daughter.
You. So I have perhaps a comment and maybe suggestion on the presentation of the data. So the previous comment on 1.5%, I understand that it's 1.5% of all women, but the practice only applies to the families where there are 2, 3 daughters. So I'm wondering, Damir, whether when you're presenting the data and discussing the prevalence of the tradition, it makes sense to show the fraction of daughters who receive these names in the families that do not have sons. So I think that it would be kind of easy. I feel that from the qualitative work, it seems to remain the practice, but it seems to be at odds with the data on 1.5%. But as you have mentioned, the practice only applies to very specific families, which probably are, I don't know, 10% of your sample. So kind of showing the prevalence in the group, which is more likely to be affected, would probably be resolve the doubts on the prevalence of the tradition. And the second one, comment question, I think that would be fascinating to see whether it affects the actual outcomes, and Life in Kyrgyzstan is amazing data set for it. So congratulations on this very interesting work already.
Thank you, Lisa. We discussed about it in Berlin. You are my fan, and thank you for support. The suggestion to show percentages could be done in limited way. For a woman who is like 70, I don't have a structure of her siblings. So she's already mother or grandmother, and in that respect, I can only see current young girls in such families where already practice is much fewer. So in that respect, there are limits. In one way, I remember we asked every woman about their siblings. There is some potential, but I'm afraid it's not really possible to do for all the generations that type of number, I would say. And thank you for the support.
Thank you, Damir. Good luck with your study. It's really fascinating. And let me introduce our next speaker. Mohru Mardonova from the International Food Policy Research Institute. Mohru is a gender and rural development researcher focusing on household decision-making, migration, and women's empowerment in Tajikistan. And her paper today is Double Burden or Newfound Freedom, Women's Empowerment in Large-Scale Male Labor Migration from Rural Tajikistan. Mohru, thank you very much for joining us online. Floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
And is it fine if I turn off my camera because I don't think that my internet is stable?
Yes, sure. Could you start present your slides? We couldn't see slides yet. Share your slides.
1 minute. Okay,
Excellent.
Okay, thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. I'm Mohru Mardonova. I'm working as a research analyst with the International Food Policy Research Institute in Tajikistan. And today I'll be presenting our research titled Double Burden or Newfound Freedom, a mixed method study on women's empowerment in the face of large-scale male labor migration from rural Tajikistan. And as we know, globally, millions of people leave their homes motivated by better employment opportunity elsewhere. And labor migration is often the outcome of a decision made by the migrants or their household members. And many research shows that migration affects women empowerment in different ways. However, the evidence is not always clear. And many studies measure only few dimensions of empowerment, not focusing on a bigger picture, such as resources, independence, and well-being. And in case of Tajikistan, migration is a widespread pattern, and usually the migrants are predominantly young men who are supporting their family who are staying behind. And in 2022, the personal remittances flow relative to the country GDP was 49.9%. And the aim of this study is to analyze the empowerment in
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it is a common problem now in Bishkek because government centralized all providers now, and we have very frequent problems with internet. Mahru, sorry, could you hear us? Could you repeat methodological part because we lost your voice?
sorry, I think I lost the connection.
Yes,
Am
we
I
can hear
audible?
you now. Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry.
Mahru, you have 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll be very quick. So the conceptual framework, Naila Kabir describes empowerment as the process by which those who have been denied the ability to make Strategic life choices acquire such ability, and there are three interrelated dimensions that are key to employment: resources, well-being, and agency. And mass migration leads to increase in consumption, food security, poverty, better housing condition, education investment. However, not all household members have equal access to these remittances, and it can lead to negative lost labor effect. In terms of agency, it can improve agency through improvement in leadership, spousal supervision. However, in extended family, autonomy is not always vivid. And due to technology advancement, men can still control women using the technology. And in terms of well-being, social status, men's migration linked with improved social status, organizing events and rituals, and for women acquiring new roles within household and community. However, it can lead to more workload for them, cognitive burden, parental stress, and etc. And this is, as it was mentioned, this is a mixed method study which employs quantitative data collected between February and March 2023 in 12 districts of Bakhytzhan region. And for the sake of this study, we are analyzing the data collected from 932 married female respondents. And we have 7 outcome variables for it: decision-making power on minor and major expenses, control over income earned from the crop, women mobility, agency, time satisfaction, and task burden. And the qualitative data was collected from 4 randomly selected districts out of these 12 districts. And in total, we conducted 12 focus group discussions, 12 in-depth interviews, and a reflexive thematic approach was used to analyze the data, the qualitative data, using in vivo 15. Themes were first developed inductively from the codes and further derived from the literature on migration and genders. And for the qualitative data, we had 3 groups: wives of migrants, mother of migrants, and men who migrated at least 5 years, like within 5-year period. And coming back again to the empowerment, these interrelated dimensions, we came up with 4 themes: remittances, decision-making and mobility, workload, and intra-household relations. The first one, remittances, which belongs to the resource. Men's migration leads to an increase in income, which is used by the household member to cover daily household needs, for household renovation and construction, purchase of durable goods, and spending on wedding and organizing other events. And I'm quoting what women say about it. Another woman said, I organized the wedding of my 3 daughters and 3 of them gave birth. Now my son is a university student. We have not even reached the construction. However, not all women equally benefit from the remittances or the money that their family receive. Especially, this is vivid in the multi-generational household. Usually, women living in the multi-generational household lack control over migration income and have limited awareness of how much their husbands are sending, and they are not always the direct recipients of the remittances. And I'm quoting what they say. He sends it to his parents. I don't have any idea of how much he sends. They send it to me. We are all in one family. I have 2 daughters-in-law. They are with me, meaning that mother-in-law is allocating the resources that they get from like the migrants sent back home. The second theme is mobility and decision-making. In the absence of as we know, traditionally, the outward-facing tasks are performed by male household members in this part of Tajikistan. However, in the absence of man, mobility and decision-making increases for women in order to perform the outward tasks. And since there are limited male supervision from the distance, women become more mobile. I'm quoting what they say. My husband purchases food, but if he's not present, I do it. When my husband was here, I could not go to many places. We are following him. Some men don't allow their wives to go to some places, they are jealous. However, mobility and decision-making remain unchanged for women who are living with parents-in-law, because they are still controlled from the parents-in-law. For those who are living with parents-in-law, there are no change. For those who live separately, it becomes easier. This is what migrants' mother said about mobility and decision-making. Workload increases for women who are living in nuclear family because they start assuming responsibilities that are traditionally assigned to men. And workload also increases for mother of migrants because there are few adults remain at household and they have to perform the outward-facing tasks because these tasks are not usually assigned to daughters-in-law. However, workload decreases for some women, especially there's a reduction in terms of spousal care responsibilities. And I'm quoting what they say about it. When my husband is here, we have to take care of both husband and children. When he's not here, we only take care of our children. When he's not here, we have less work to do. Moving next, the fourth theme, intra-household relations. During the interview, many women mentioned that they often miss their husbands and they experience emotional distress. When he is here, life is different. It's sweeter, we go around together. And during the interview, we did not directly ask whether they are having they are establishing a relationship or family in migration destination or not, but these points were frequently mentioned by men as well as women, that some migrants establish affectionate relationships at their migration destination. Because he has a wife there, his life is 100% good. If I go there, what should I be doing? This is what what wife of migrant said. However, it positively, some women mentioned that when their husband migrates, it positively impacts their relationships. When he migrates to Russia, he becomes more loving. When he moves further away, he becomes even more loving. Because of this love, I want him to be far. This is good. Further is better. Now, coming to the quantitative result. Here we see that in this graph we are presenting decision making on certain activities, and we are having a woman whose husband is migrating and whose woman whose husband is not migrating, and there's no significant difference between these two groups. However, when we check for senior and junior women, we see that senior women have a higher input and decision on minor and major expenses, as well as in income earned from the crop. They are more mobile, and however, they are more overwhelmed, feel overwhelmed more than junior women. In terms of agency and leisure time satisfaction, we see that junior women are more satisfied with their time and have higher agency, but the result is not significant. Here, when checking, this is the regression analysis of our study, and it shows that a woman whose husband is migrating, it's positively associated with making decision on major expenses, however, having negative agency. And women whose spouse is migrating and who are holding senior role within the household, it's positively associated with making a decision on minor expenses, major expenses, income earned from the plot, and also being more mobile. And a woman whose son is migrating, it's positively associated with making decision on minor expenses and having higher time satisfaction. As women get older, or when we check for age, it's positively associated with making decision on major expenses, mobility. However, it's negatively associated with time satisfaction and being overwhelmed. And as number of male adults in the household increases, it's negatively associated with making decision on minor expenses and mobility, as these household members will make decision. These male household member will make decision and perform the outward facing tasks. And education level is positively associated with being more mobile. And to sum up, women holding senior roles within the household, when their husband or son migrates, the decision-making power rises. Their decision-making power and mobility rises, and they are having lower leisure time satisfaction and agency. However, for junior women, there are almost a little to no change in mobility and decision-making power. However, they experience higher agency. And that's it from my side. I think I made it. Do I still have time or not?
We are open a floor for Q&A.
Questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, dear colleagues, please, if you have questions, comments, floor is yours.
Better my question than no question at all, right? Hello, Moho. This is Martin Patrick. Hi. Thanks for your talk. Luckily, you made it in the end with the network. Can you hear me?
Hello, Professor. Yes, I do.
All right. So your conclusions seem to be broadly positive, right, about the effects of migration on women's agency. I wonder whether this conclusion should take into account the long-term effects of migration on social relationships and, family stability and so on and so forth. I'm not so sure whether the conclusion holds. And secondly, I wanted to very quickly only mention a study that qualitatively fully supports your findings and that is very deeply into Central Asia. And that is the study on the feminization of agriculture in Tajikistan by my former student Niginakhon Muhamedova, who really supports these conclusions that you showed quantitatively today.
Thanks a lot, Professor. I have to check it one more time. Yes, I have to go over that. But migration, it's in the case of Tajikistan and for most of the families, it's a long-term process, or how to call it. It passes from one generation to another generation. If father migrates later on in the same family, son is migrating. And it's, yeah.
My point is, I mean, today the women may feel they have more agency and can make more decisions. But if the marriage breaks apart next year and, the kids suffer from that in the next but 1 year, then the overall conclusion and evaluation may be more nuanced, actually, of the effects of migration on the women.
Yes. Yes. Then that's completely like different scenario, right? When we are talking here, it's like they are together. A husband is migrating and wife is staying at home with her children and experiencing or having this experience.
Thank you. Елizaveta Perova from the World Bank. Very interesting presentation. I was curious if you are planning to use the qualitative findings that you presented for the design of any potential intervention. I think that, for example, there is a study by Ganesh Kumar and I think Dean Yang, who did an intervention on migrant couples. I think that these were Indian migrants in Qatar, and they tried to improve communication and observed the intervention was improving communication and joint decision-making. So I'm wondering whether you're planning any interventions to address what you are finding. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for this question. At this point of time, no, but we are trying to present these findings to other organizations so that when they start to implement programs or even for other researchers, they should consider family hierarchy and the dynamics within extended living arrangements when applying projects or conducting studies, but we are not like directly approaching families or like implementing it. Not at this point of time, but I cannot say anything about the future.
Thank you very much. Do we have more questions, comments? If not, let me thank you, Mohro, for your very insightful presentation. And with that, let me conclude our session on women's agency, identity, and well-being in Central Asia. Thank you all for your participation, and please join our next session. It will be keynote by Dr. Dolut Kildieva in main room. Thank you.